I did, how I started, when I started, and how I got started. So, moving on. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about my history. As you can see, Filipino. I was born in the Philippines, and I was raised in the United States. My father was one of the last Rockefeller scholars that came into Kansas State University. Don't hold that against me. But my whole family went to K-State. And I was born in 1962 in the Philippines, and I came here in 1963. My father got his master's and PhD at K-State in plant pathology. As you can see in the picture up there, that's a real bamboo house. So it was my mother, and that was my first birthday. It's my father, and then my sister back then. So when we came to the States, I was about 23 months, and I had we had a little thing up from Panama, or was it Panama? Was it? It was one of the flight buttons that I had, and I had a little cargo coat, and we came to the States with my dad. Only had $15 in his pocket. And then he got his master's and PhD. And I went up and grew up in Manhattan, Kansas during my high school years. And then in 1975, my dad turned around and walked in the front door and said, well, we're moving to Africa. And so he packed up our whole family, and we went to the Republic of Congo for 4 years out of my high school years, which is pretty traumatic because I only saw my parents twice a year. And we lived in an area on the west part of the Republic of Congo, which was back then called Zaire. And I lived in Kinshasa, which is the main city, and my sister and I did, and my parents lived in the bush with my little brother. And so my little brother learned Swahili and spoke the language and hung out with all of the Africans. And there's a picture of my father. And why he was there was he was part of a task force of about 5 scientists that worked for the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. And he was sent on a task force to find out resistant varieties for their main crop in Africa, which was cassava. It was like a potato. And by the time they were done, after 4 years, they came up with 200 resistant varieties. And so he did a little piece of his support of solving world hunger, which is kind of hard for me to fill those shoes. But he's living now in Manhattan, Kansas, and he's in long-term care. But he's had his fair share of traveling all over the world, and we were constantly following him around. And then I went to K-State, came back my senior year in high school, which is really tough, because I walked into Dillon's and I was barefoot, and I wasn't realizing there was a change in clothing and how to wear and what to do, and socially I was a little bit behind for about a couple of years. So when you walk into Dillon's barefoot, it's not really pretty cool. So anyway, I graduated K-State, Kansas State University, across the river. We're back there at Manhattan, and got my first job with Abercon. I was one of the first architectural engineers. I don't know if we have any architectural engineers in here. Do we have any? Nice to know. Good to know. I graduated, and then I ended up working for them. I was their first class of students that we got from K-State. And then the following next semester, I was back going to K-State looking for some more architectural engineers. One of the things that I was pretty proud of when we came out of the Archie program, which I think a lot of you Archies are too, is that in our business we need to use and utilize Revit and AutoCAD. And there aren't, I think, a lot of classes that offer that. And so it's really important that I really stress that if you are going into the building systems design business, try to get an internship so that you can learn how to use Revit and AutoCAD, because that is our main source of how to develop our plans and provide intellectual property to our consultants. Moving on, I got off track. And so I ended up working for Abercon for about a year, and then my ex-husband ended up looking for a job in Topeka, Kansas, so we ended up moving back about a year later. And he worked for Payless Shoe Source, and I ended up working for a small minority firm, and then I got picked up by Hallmark Carts, working as a facilities engineer, doing work for their 1.5 square foot facility. And then I also managed their prototype rollouts for all of their cart shops. If you remember Hallmark Carts, remember how we had Hallmark cards in all of our single stores, and everybody was sending out cards? Well, now we're not. So what were we doing? We were doing internet and everything else. So they lost a lot of business that way, and so did Hallmark. So I had to figure out what I needed to do afterwards. And so I had my second child and 2 kids under the age of 2. And I decided, well, maybe I'll take a 40% pay cut and see what I can do. So I got approached by an architect. I don't know if anybody knows Julie Woner. She's out of Kansas City. She's a female-owned architecture firm. Been there for she's been doing it for about 25, 30 years. Asked me if I would consider wanting to be a woman-owned minority-owned business, which I kind of went, I don't know what that means. And she said, well, look it up and apply. And sure enough, I got certified and I started getting my first client that way. And I started the business in 1998. And why I started it was basically I was doing stuff working part-time when I left Crown Center because I'd had 2 kids and I thought I'd take a 40% pay cut. So I thought, well, I'll make a little bit of extra money here and there. And my ex was making majority of the money as a breadwinner. So I thought that would be fine. And I thought I'd have some flexibility with my children because as a woman, a lot of times you're kind of torn between, well, am I the primary caregiver or do I have a career? And sometimes you don't have a good choice and you have to make some sacrifices. So my sacrifice was I took a 40% pay cut and I thought I'd spend more time during my kids' early years and be with them. Unfortunately, one day my ex came home and said, I quit. I said, what? And he said, I don't have a job. I quit my job. So within 48 hours, I had to turn around and think, well, I'm going to do a part-time job into a full-time job and figure out how I was going to support my whole family. And so I kind of reached down and decided, well, what have I learned? What am I going to do? And where am I going to learn how to do this? Because when I came out of college, I just had an architectural engineering degree. I didn't have a business degree. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know what a balance statement was. I didn't know what a P&L statement was. And so you need those kind of tools to be able to run a business because you're in the business of making money, correct? Making a profit, and you got to pay for all your employees. So what I did was how I started the business. I took various classes. I took the Fast Track 2 class out of Hugh Kaufman Foundation. And then luckily enough, I think by the time we ended up finishing the class, it was about an 8-week course. They asked me to do a presentation in front of my class. I wasn't ready, so I kind of winged it. And then I was able to get an interview with the Kansas City Business Journal, and that's how it kind of launched my career. I got a little bit of recognition for that. And then I was with a minority enterprise. I think it was some type of an organization in Kansas City for minority businesses. And I had a scholarship to go to the Tuck School of Business for Dartmouth. And that was about a $6,000 grant. And so while I was with my 3rd child, and I had just delivered him, Jack, and he was about 8 weeks old, I took off for about 8 weeks, 7 weeks, and went to this Tuck School of Business in New Hampshire and learned a little bit about how to run a business and how to grow it. And learned about balance statements and P&Ls and all that kind of stuff. Why I started engineering professional services? Well, like I said, I really didn't have a choice. That was the only thing I knew. And I took a lot of the experiences that I had from my earlier years of traveling, parents picking me up and moving all over the world, and using that as a tool to be able to understand how to be more flexible in how I ran my life and what I did with my family. And so all of those things that I had when I was earlier got me to the point where I could use those tools to help me in my business. How did I go about generating clients and who was my target market? Well, a lot of it had to do with understanding what was going on in the real world as far as business, what was making money, what was not. And since I was starting in the retail business with Hallmark cards, I was able to look into that and study it and find out what type of markets there were. And so I focused mostly on what I thought I knew best, which was retail. Prototypical design, rolling those projects out, getting it done efficiently and fast. And so that's how I started the business. So GPW, like I said, originated in 1998, and we're main services that we provide are, let me go to the next, well, let me go back a little bit, because I think I need to talk about that. Our core business is mostly retail, commercial, prototype rollouts, which is very specialized, and that's what helps us maintain our continuous revenue stream. Because a lot of times if you try to diversify a little bit too much in a business, then you're ending up having to spread a lot more of what you can or can't do, and a lot of times it's what you can't do, and it ends up spending a lot more time, busy time, and spending more money. And so what you want to do is you want to focus on something that helps you get better and faster at it so you can make more money. I know it sounds terrible, but in our business, that's what it's all about. Let me see. Move on to the next thing. One of the things that I did is, like I mentioned, is I went to Dartmouth, some of the recognitions and awards, Fast Track Tree Program, Kaufman Foundation in Kansas City, Missouri. If ever in the future you decide to want to start a business, one of the things you really need to do is focus on trying to learn how to run a business. Getting a business plan, talking to a bank, learning how to put that together, trying to find financial support, because you got to be able to support your business, you got to support your salaries, you got to support overhead, you got to support your, everything else that helps run the business. Also, back in 2006, we were recipients of the 25 and Under Award. We were recipient of the Business of the Year in 2007 from the American Asian Chamber of Commerce. And then in 2007, 2011, was part of the Hellsberg Entrepreneurial Mentoring Program. And now I'm a fellow. So that was fun. You learned and worked with a lot of people who ran very large businesses, and getting and networking with them helps you find some opportunities in your market. And then just recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, I sat on a couple boards here in Lawrence to help establish a little bit more of our footprint within the city. Our company has several service classifications. As you can see, NAICS, which is, we provide engineering services, drafting, and we sometimes occasionally will offer architectural, we'll outsource some of that work. We are a limited liability company, and I don't know if any of you know what that means, but there are various different types of corporations and business types. I chose something with limited liability because it's a little bit above a sole proprietorship, which in a limited liability, it doesn't have all of the requirements that a C corporation is, but it keeps you and shields you from being any type of, I guess you are not being, how would I say that? You would be, your assets and your finances are not going to be, if you get sued, they will be protected. Also, if you put together an organizational operating agreement with the state of Kansas, then you can prevent any other organization to have your name. Qualifications, we're one of the few woman-owned minority engineering consulting firms in the country that provides 5 different services, which is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, and refrigeration. And we work with basically our main core of clients are Kroger, Walmart, Target, Sam's Club, and I think it is 7-Elevens. We've been in the Walmart program for 17 years, the Kroger program for 11. Just recently acquired Target 2 years, and we've been in the AT&T for 10. And if you have any questions, can you raise your hands, because I'm willing to take any questions. This is kind of boring, but mostly it's about our business and what we do. We're licensed to practice engineering in over 47 states. Most of our work, like I said, is on a national scale. We're one of, and I see Henderson is in engineers here. Is Henderson up here? Hi guys. We work with Henderson and a group of probably about 11 engineering firms on a national scale, working for Walmart and Sam's Club. And a lot of times we're kind of a small group of firms that provide services for them, and we've been approved to do work for them on a national scale. And sometimes, as an engineering firm and as a small business, sometimes we do work together and they help us out. And then, let's see, move on. Core competencies, like I said, we provide mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, refrigeration, electrical. And then we also do specialize in surveys and site assessments all over the country. And we do prototype rollouts, historical preservation, and renovations. 95% of our work is mostly renovations across the country. Some of our target markets and markets that we try to get work from is, I think it's typical from a lot of engineering firms: institutional, federal, retail, commercial, municipal, healthcare, industrial. For us, we mostly focus on commercial and retail. We've done quite a few projects early on when we started the business. We did a lot of projects, federal work, with the Corps of Engineers and Fort Leavenworth. And we did some healthcare projects, but mostly it's retail and commercial. And like I said, our target markets that we're focusing on is retail, federal, and industrial. Basically, those are our three. Our current clientele in our business is sometimes architects. Majority of the time it's architects, but sometimes it's developers, corporations, and we can work directly with the client. We work with, for instance, BG engineers. We've done some work with you folks a couple of times. Good to see you folks. And sometimes services they don't provide, we help them with, and vice versa. We work with owners. We work with federal agencies across the country, state agencies, and contractors. And these are just a couple of slides of some of the projects that we did with the military, the Army and the Navy, the Air Force, Homeland Security. Industrial projects, we did some work with KCATA, Kansas City Aviation Department. We did a lot of work. I think everybody's noticing the new airport is getting built. The original retail stores and all those pods GPW did with Warner Architects, so they're going to be gone here in a year or two, so you won't see it anymore. And then Target we acquired 2 years ago because of our experience working with Walmarts. With Targets, an interesting thing with Targets is that we do not do any of their site visits. Their site visits are done with an organization that they use out of India. So as you notice, as we become more of a global economy, we utilize everybody all over the world. The good thing about it is, when we're on this time zone, they're in another time zone, so literally you can be working 24 hours a day, and that's what Target does. And so we use, we take their information and then we use that to develop our plans. And we do a lot of work with them on remodels, new stores. We do a lot of work in urban areas like Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Dallas. And we basically have several contracts with them. New stores, remodels, split systems, so we do some work where we renovate and replace some of their HVAC systems in some of their stores. Same thing with Walmart, we do the same thing. We're a part of a small group of, like I said, 11 firms, Henderson included, Benchmark, NPW, where we do work on replacing air handling units and refrigerated cases for all their stores, and they have close to 8,000 across the country. And so we go out in our backpacks and we do site visits and we assess all their conditions, existing conditions, and we help replace them and do the design on some of the stores across the country. And we also do Sam's Clubs and then Walmart remodels and any other new special projects that they have across the country. Kroger is a different animal. They have over 36 different brands in their program. A lot of it's based on acquisitions, so they've got King Super in Colorado. They have Fred Meyer. I don't know where that's at. I think it's in the Midwest. We used to have Food for Less in Kansas. Dillon's. If you notice all the Dillons here in town, you notice they've been renovated, right? We did all of that. So we did a couple of those a couple of years ago. We worked with several architects on those projects, so that's architectural driven. But the way Kroger works is they don't work on a national scale, they work on a region. And so we were lucky enough to be approved to do work on a national scale with them, so we're approved on every single region with Kroger to work on a national scale. So there's, I think, 6 or 7 regions. We're mostly in the Midwest, the Central, the Colorado, the Columbus region, the Memphis region, and the Delta region. And most of that work is renovations. So going into the stores and renovating, making changes based on what they want, and then developing the plans and specifications. And then sending out to a bid. Any questions? I don't know if that was too fast, but any questions about how I started, when I started, why I started, if I started? Questions about being a woman-owned business, why I did it? Yes?
You covered the design process for everything but AT&T. Can you describe that real quick?
The design process?
Yeah, design process.
Okay, that's something that's really interesting in our business is when we come out of college, a lot of us don't understand what it takes to do a project, right? And a lot of times we have to go in and we have, as the employer, we have to teach a lot of these kids what that's all about. And so when we talk about the design process, it has to do with what it takes to build a building. And a lot of times it starts with, it's either a request to do a proposal, a client calls you and says, I have a project. Either it's a renovation or it's a new store and it's a ground up. And so sometimes it's, not very often do we do something that's an hourly rate anymore. That's like, no. So a lot of times it's a fixed fee. So what you do is you assess what that scope of work is on a project, and they tell you what that is, and you come back and you tell them this is what our fee, this is what it takes to do the work. And a lot of times it's either you're in competition with another company or you've already been pre-approved to do the work. In our case, with the contracts that we have, it's usually pre-approved, and they approve it and we go forward. If not, then you've got to compete with another consultant. That's just the first part of it. And the second part is if you're doing a renovation, then you've got to go out to the site and you've got to assess it. If you're doing HVAC, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, then you've got to assess all the systems in the building. For instance, example is a Walmart, that's a 200,000 square foot store. And typically in a business, you're only allowed so many hours to get a project done based on your fee. And sometimes they ask you to put together a proposal to do a site visit. When you do a site visit, typically you want to do it as fast as you can, as quick as you can, the best way that you can with the people who know how to do it. And so what we do is we train our staff, and we've got approval from corporate, from Walmart, from Kroger, from Target, to go in to a local store and get trained on how to do a site visit. And a lot of times you got to have your backpack. You take basically 3 people. You've got 2 people to do the plumbing and the mechanical and the fire protection, and then you've got 1 person who's doing the refrigeration and the electrical. And you do is you assess the store from start to front to back, from top to bottom, and you take close to 8,000 photos, and you make sure you take them clear, because if you come back, it's on your dollar. It's not a good deal. So you got to be able to know how to use a camera and take some good photos. You got to be able to take the existing floor plans that's there and then assess what is there and what's changed based on the latest changes on the drawings. And you go back and you bring it back to your office and then you set up your drawings. And nowadays we do it in Revit and BIM. And then after that, then you have conversations with the architect and the owner, and they tell you what the scope of work is, what you need to focus on your drawings. And then you develop them. Usually you have, sometimes depending upon the client, you have several submittals. Sometimes you have them at 50%, where you go in and you do coordination sets, and you work with all the disciplines, the architects, the civil, the structural, and you look at conflicts within the drawings, making sure that everything works and is coordinated. You work and put together specs, and then after you get it done, we get to put something in at 95% or 100%, and when it goes to 100%, then it goes to the city. And depending upon what jurisdiction you're in, it gets approved, they review it, and you're asked for a permit to build. And then the city reviewers, usually, it depends on whether you can get in or not, or how long it takes. Sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's 6 weeks, so you've got to plan ahead of that to make sure that you're going to be able to build it on the dates that you determine for construction. And then the review comments from the owner, and the review comments from the city, and then you make those changes, and then it goes out to permitting, and then it goes out to bid, and usually it depends on either it's low bid or that gets determined by between the architect and the owner. And then afterwards it gets built, and you answer questions. based on what you drew on your documents. And that's why we have insurance liability, right? We're not perfect. And sometimes, in some cases, sometimes the drawings aren't correct. And you've got to make some clarifications, and you've got to work with the contractors to make sure that it can be built, or we can provide equivalent equals for specific pieces of equipment. And then you approve it and send it on its way, and hopefully when it gets done, the contractor calls you back, and then you either do construction administration, which is reviewing what you built and assessing whether it got done correctly, and then making comments and changes and making sure that the contractor corrects it on his drawings, and it gets built, and they have opening date, and then you move on to the next project. And the skill of that is being able to shuffle that, you know, with all your different staff, and how many projects can you do a year? How many can you take on? You know, how many projects can you do? That's the creative part of running a business. Does it answer your question about the design process?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy on risk and maybe some of the risk you were willing to incur when you were starting your business?
When I started the business? Well, I come from a family that takes a lot of risks, as you can see. You know, my father takes his family and uproots them and takes them to Africa and says, you know, figure it out, kiddo. And I was only 11 years old. And I think the first month I came out, and I was in I was living in a dormitory, is what they call it. It was a hostel. It was a Methodist Presbyterian hostel. And the strangest thing about it is, you know, I'm Catholic. Nothing great about that. But a lot of the kids came from missionary families. A lot of the kids were born and raised in Africa. They didn't know what I was. They thought I was a heathen. And I was like, are you kidding? And so I had to overcome some social differences with the people that I lived with. And that taught me how to deal with adapting to different environments, working with different cultures, understanding people. Listening is a really big thing that you have to learn when you're running a business. You really need to listen to your people and to your clients. Yes, there's a lot of risk. And in my case, I had to kind of bite the bullet and hope and pray that it would work, and it did. And surround yourself with people who are competent, more competent than you. And find that you put some, I wouldn't say trust, I'd say give them the right tools that they can succeed, so that you can succeed as a company, and invest in them as much as you can. Any other questions? Yes. Parker works for me. He's one of my interns. Go ahead.
As someone who owns an engineering business, how do you find your day is balanced between running the business itself and being an engineer or a project manager? And how do you keep yourself from, you know, just working 24/7, trying to juggle both of those things?
I don't know if I can answer that. When I started the business, it was more of, it was a necessity. I had to do it. And then eventually it became my life. And you got to figure out a balance, because if you don't, you're never going to sleep. And you're going to always constantly be worrying about what's the next job? How am I going to be able to get work? How am I going to support my company in 12 months? And so the goal is to try to keep a balance with your family and your friends, and sometimes you just have to stop and find yourself a hobby, for God's sake, you know? Do something outside of the office that gets your mind off of your job. And if it's going home and spending time with your kids, or going home and doing something with your children, or like for me, the last couple of years, my son got involved in volleyball. Oh God, help me, I was traveling all the time. But I tell you, I really loved it, and I thrived for it, because doing something different, getting your mind off of what you do every day is helpful, because as you know, as principals and owners of a company, you're on the phone 24/7, no matter what. And your boss is your client. And your client is always right, regardless of what happens. And so you've got to figure out a way to work that around your schedule. So, yes, I'm accessible 24/7. That's part of the game. That's part of the business. Any other questions? Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
So like when you started your business, what business conflicts did you find tough to overcome or face when you started your
What did I have to overcome
Yeah, business-wise.
when I started the business? I don't understand what that means. Like, overcome what?
Like any obstacles, like business-related obstacles that you weren't familiar with coming into
That's a good one. One of the things that I learned when I started the business, as all of you women know, it was back then in the 1980s, 90s. It was a it was men-driven, men-owned businesses. So to be able to find clients that would actually look at you and respect you for being an owner wasn't very easy. So what I decided to do, and I had a difficult time locally, not to say that I didn't try, I tried, but what I did was I went on a national scale, I went on a regional scale, and that's where I was able to get my success. But those were some of the obstacles. Also, some of the obstacles was that when you start your business, a lot of times you need financial support. And one of the things you need to do is put together a good business plan. How, why, when, marketing, all that kind of stuff. Putting together some good information and then presenting it to a bank to see if they'd at least give you some seed money to start. I went to basically 3 or 4 banks in this town, and none of them talked to me. Mainly is because my ex-husband owned 25% of the company, and so when I would come into the interviews, we'd both sit down in the conversation, and the president of the bank would ask me a question, and I'd answer it. I had all my information, I had my business plan, I had it all together, all my notes. And then they'd turn around and I'd look at my ex and they'd say, well, how can you guarantee this is going to be successful? What are you going to use as a collateral? And time again that happened, so I realized, well, I'm not going to bring him along anymore. And so I had to do it by myself. And that's how I got a little bit more successful. That was one of the obstacles. Other obstacles was finding work, going out and generating income. I mean, you don't expect it to walk in the door. And for somebody who just starts flat on their feet with hardly any clients, you got to be sticking to peanut butter and jelly for a while before you can get some revenue and find some work. And then building the staff to do the work for you is also difficult. That's just a couple of things on the top of my head, but there's a lot more. But honestly, it's not that. It can be fun as you go along and stick with it and get some good clients. It's got great rewards. So, any other questions? Back there.
In the early stages of building your business, did you find that finding and building a team of competent people came as success in the business came, or was that a more active process on your part?
Finding good people to work for you is very difficult. A lot of it has to do with building a culture in your company, which provides an environment for them to thrive and grow and challenge them on a daily basis. And sometimes, depending upon the kind of work that you do, it could be tedious. If you're doing rollouts all the time, they're going to go, well, I don't want to do this every day. So you got to be able to find some diversification on clientele and work. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
How helpful was the mentorship program, and how helpful were you in your
Benefits program?
the mentorship program that you had mentioned, like the pipeline program, the entrepreneurship,
Do I have a mentorship program?
the ones that you were a part of.
Oh, the ones that okay. Yes, that was very helpful. Especially if you want to start a business, make sure you find out and connect yourself with a lot of people who know how to run a business. sometimes it's always important to have support. And for me, what I did as the business started growing and developed an advisory board. And a lot of times, if you're running a business, you're pretty much on your own. A lot of times it is difficult to get support. You don't know who to go to. People don't, on a daily basis, don't experience what you do. And so what I did was I found a group of 5 people in my company or my town, and I've got a very successful business person. I've got a very successful contracting person. I've got a person who's successful in finance. Of course, a lawyer. You really need a lawyer sometimes. And to help you with the decisions you make, as far as long-term planning, as far as what you do on a daily basis, because you can't do it all on your own. You need support. And mentoring from looking, like for instance, Fast Track True program out of Kansas City is you and Kaufman is a great tool. They provide a lot of classes for people to learn about how to run a business. We're engineers. I mean, anybody here has a minor in business? Good for you. So very rarely, you know, our programs and our classes are difficult. We're struggling just to make it through. And then to be able to go in and learn how to run a business or what a business is all about, that's a whole different ballgame. But it's numbers. If you can get numbers, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out. What comes in, what comes out. Anything else? Yes?
What was your favorite project that you personally worked on?
What was my favorite project that I personally worked on? That was a while back. Okay. When I came back, and I worked for a small firm in Kansas City called ME Group. Do you guys remember them? ME Group? You don't remember them? They were a small firm that had an office in, I think it was in the East Coast and then in Kansas City. And the second day, because I worked in Detroit, right? And so I came back and then I followed my ex and he got a job at LSU Source because he had an MBA and I followed him. I didn't have a degree. I only had BS. So I followed him and then I had to look for a job. And so I ended up having to work for a firm called ME Group. And what was the question again?
What was your favorite project?
Okay, my favorite project. Okay, because there was a lot of stuff going in my head. I started my job there. On my second day on the job, my boss quit. I was 1 year out of college. 1 year. Barely any experience on how to do AutoCAD back then. And he left me, and we had it was a small office, about 10 people. And the principal of the company locked himself up in his room and wouldn't come out because he had a deadline, a 98%, 95% project, and he didn't come out because he forgot he had a deadline that day. And so I was stuck with a project right out of college. And even though it was very difficult, and back then I learned a lot. I can tell you the change orders were this thick. But I learned a lot of how to do it. I just got thrown into the fire and I learned how to do design by myself. I learned, I learned what I had when I came out of college. In the RK program, they teach you a lot about that. And so mostly I did was lighting and electrical and power. And so I was able to complete that project, and it actually got built, Paseo High School. So if you see it now, I did that. And then lighting projects were kind of fun, but that was one of my biggest projects I worked on. Also, when I worked with Abercon, I worked on a couple of projects with manufacturing plants, Nippon Denso, Chrysler. When I started my first project, they said, I came out of college and they said, well, we want you to work on, temporary power for this Chrysler plant. I thought temporary power is no big deal. You put in temporary power for a small building, huge. There was one engineer when I talked to him on my second day on the job, and I said, so, do you have any projects you completed? Have you been able to reap the rewards of what you designed and be able to see it? He goes, honey, I've been here 15 years and I haven't even done my building. And you can explain why. It's a Nippon Denso plant. It's an automotive assembly plant. It takes 15 years to build. So, depending on what what market or what industry you're in, it's going to be different on what you do as far as developing plans and documents. Any other questions? You ready? Oh, sorry. Oh, I do have one last question. Let me see here. Where did I start my business? Anybody can answer it. Where did I start my business? Nice. She gets a GPW water bottle. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.